In 1976, inside a small California garage, two young men began building computers that almost nobody believed would change the world. At the time, governments controlled information, corporations followed political power, and technology was simply a tool. But over the next few decades, something unprecedented happened. A company that once struggled to survive transformed into one of the most powerful entities on Earth. A company with more cash than entire nations. A company capable of influencing elections, shaping economies, controlling global supply chains, and affecting the daily lives of billions of people without ever firing a single bullet. That company is Apple. Today, Apple is no longer just a tech company selling phones and laptops. It has become a global force powerful enough to challenge governments themselves. Its products dominate modern life. Its decisions move financial markets. Its ecosystem controls how people communicate, work, shop, and even think. Entire industries rise or collapse depending on Apple's choices. Politicians criticize it publicly while privately fearing its influence. Nations attempt to regulate it, yet many depend economically on its existence. But how did this happen? How did a company that started in a garage become more powerful than some governments? And perhaps more importantly, what happens when corporations gain more influence than the countries trying to control them? To understand that, we need to go back to the beginning. In the 1970s, the world of computing was nothing like today. Computers were enormous machines, owned mostly by governments, universities, and giant corporations. Ordinary people had almost no access to them. Technology was cold, complicated, and intimidating. But two young visionaries, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, believed something radically different. They believed computers could become personal, not machines for institutions, but tools for individuals. That vision led to the creation of the Apple I and later the Apple II, one of the first massively successful personal computers in history. Suddenly, computing was no longer reserved for governments and elites. Apple helped ignite the personal computer revolution, placing powerful technology directly into people's homes. And that was the first warning sign. Because every time technology becomes personal, power shifts. Governments traditionally controlled information through institutions, media, and infrastructure. But Apple was helping create a future where individuals could access information independently. A future where technology companies would become the gatekeepers of communication itself. By the 1980s, Apple had already become one of the fastest-growing companies in the world. But internally, chaos was growing. Steve Jobs was pushed out of the company he helped create, and many believed Apple's golden era was over. Meanwhile, competitors like Microsoft dominated the market. Apple looked weak, directionless, and close to collapse. Then came one of the greatest corporate comebacks in history. In 1997, Apple was on the edge of bankruptcy. The company was losing money, its products were confusing, and investors had little confidence in its future. That was when Steve Jobs returned, and what happened next completely changed the balance of power in the modern world. Jobs understood something governments failed to understand at the time. The future would not belong to the countries with the largest armies, but to the companies controlling technology ecosystems. Instead of making dozens of mediocre products, Apple simplified everything. The company focused on design, exclusivity, branding, and user experience. Then, in 2001, Apple introduced the iPod. It wasn't the first MP3 player, but it changed the music industry forever. Suddenly, Apple wasn't simply selling hardware anymore. It was building an ecosystem. That ecosystem became one of the most powerful business weapons ever created. People who bought one Apple product often stayed inside the Apple world permanently. iPods connected to iTunes, Macs connected to iPhones, apps connected to Apple IDs. The deeper users entered the ecosystem, the harder it became to leave. This created something governments could never easily replicate: digital dependency. Then came 2007, the year everything changed. When Steve Jobs walked onto a stage and introduced the iPhone, most people thought it was simply another phone launch. In reality, it was the beginning of a technological empire that would reshape the global economy. The iPhone became far more than a device. It became the center of modern life. People used it to communicate, navigate cities, consume news, manage finances, work remotely, shop online, and document their lives. Over time, entire industries became dependent on smartphones. Companies adapted around Apple's ecosystem. App developers relied on the App Store. Businesses optimized services for iOS users. Content creators built careers through Apple-powered platforms. And with every iPhone sold, Apple's influence expanded. At the same time, governments began losing one of their greatest advantages: control over information distribution. Historically, nations controlled infrastructure, roads, energy systems, communication systems. But in the digital age, companies like Apple started owning the platforms where modern life actually happened. In many ways, Apple became a private digital government operating across borders. Think about it. Apple decides which apps can exist on its platform. It determines payment systems. It controls software access. It sets privacy standards affecting billions of people. A single Apple policy change can financially destroy companies overnight. Few governments possess that level of immediate global influence. Then there's Apple's financial power. Today, Apple generates revenues larger than the GDP of many countries. Its market value has surpassed trillions of dollars, making it one of the most valuable corporations in human history. Entire national economies would struggle to match Apple's financial strength. Investors across the globe depend on its stock performance. Pension funds, banks, and financial institutions are deeply connected to Apple's success. At times, Apple's movements influence markets more than political speeches from world leaders. But Apple's true power goes beyond money. Its real strength lies in supply chains. Modern governments often rely on slow, bureaucratic systems. Apple, however, operates one of the most sophisticated supply chains on Earth. The company coordinates manufacturing across multiple continents with astonishing precision. Factories in China, chip suppliers in Taiwan, logistics networks spanning oceans. Apple's operations resemble the infrastructure of a superpower. In fact, some analysts argue Apple indirectly helped transform China into a technological manufacturing giant. The company's massive dependence on Chinese factories accelerated industrial growth, workforce specialization, and infrastructure development at extraordinary speed. This created a strange new reality. One American corporation became deeply intertwined with the rise of China itself. And that relationship exposed something extraordinary. Governments increasingly depended on corporations just as much as corporations depended on governments. When politicians threaten Apple with regulations, they risk damaging jobs, investments, stock markets, and national economic stability. Apple is no longer just a business that governments regulate. In many ways, it has become part of the global economic system governments rely upon. That creates enormous tension, because democracies are designed to limit concentrations of power. Yet technology corporations continue accumulating influence at historical levels. Apple controls hardware, software, digital marketplaces, cloud services, entertainment ecosystems, payment systems, and consumer behavior simultaneously. No empire in history ever possessed this type of influence without territorial conquest. And perhaps the most fascinating part is this: millions of people willingly invite Apple deeper into their lives every single year. People trust Apple with private conversations, financial data, photos, locations, health information, and daily routines. Governments often struggle to gain that level of trust from their own citizens. This is where the line between corporation and governing force begins to blur. Apple even challenged governments directly over privacy. When law enforcement agencies demanded access to encrypted iPhones, Apple resisted publicly, arguing that creating backdoors would threaten user security worldwide. The battle revealed something astonishing. A corporation was openly defying government pressure on a global stage, and millions supported Apple. That moment symbolized a major shift in modern history. Technology companies were no longer simply serving governments. They were beginning to negotiate with them as equals. Today, Apple's influence extends into entertainment, finance, artificial intelligence, healthcare, and even geopolitics. Its manufacturing decisions affect international relations. Its privacy policies shape internet standards. Its innovations influence how future societies will function. The company has become something humanity rarely has seen before, a borderless power structure with economic influence rivaling nations. But this raises an uncomfortable question. If corporations become more powerful than governments, who truly controls the future? Because unlike governments, corporations are not elected by citizens. Their leaders are not chosen democratically. Their primary responsibility is not to the public, but to shareholders. And yet, companies like Apple increasingly shape the rules of modern life. The world is entering a new era where power no longer belongs exclusively to nations, armies, or politicians. It belongs to whoever controls technology, information, and the ecosystems people cannot live without. And in that new world, Apple may already be one of the most powerful empires ever created.